The one thing I did want to say is let this dry a couple days. Don't rush to start it because you've got all this stuff underneath that's now drying. I know it's very thin, and this of course has air, so it's going to dry faster. And if you see any coming through that you want to kind of clean out, go ahead and clean that out. I think if we made our base a little bit thicker in the beginning, we wouldn't have those issues with it coming through. But any of these areas that we've put on that we need to let dry, just go ahead and let those completely dry. Again, don't rush it. Remember how we talked about that is so important with this project, is not to rush it. Okay, if you have one that's too high where we're overlapping, you can use your wire cutters and trim the overlapping one down a little bit if you need to. So know that you can kind of adjust that, but don't forget we're going to cover that up. We're going to work on our little door, and I'm still adjusting here. I went and put a cork. I cut it to the length I wanted it to help adjust our guy. There we go. And so if you ever need to do that, just take a cork and cut it the height that you need it. On our little door, I took a piece of paper and I made a little arch and then cut straight. The size is going to depend on you, your gourd size, and all of the above. So know that. It's a kind of a personal opinion plus the size of your gourd. I'm going to use two-way tape to put my stencil on here, and I'm going to put it right down this guy. Remember how we talked about covering that up with some of our door? I'm going to do that, and you're going to figure out where you want it. You don't want it too high or too low. And again, that's probably going to be more of a personal opinion. I always think it should be kind of lower, but you don't want it too low where you don't see it. And then I'm going to simply take my hobby knife, and I switched to a different blade here. I usually use my round blade, but you can use what works best. And we're going to cut through these layers to the gourd. All the way around, and then we're simply going to remove the silicone or the frosting. And if you need to adjust, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with adjusting it. And you may have to put that back on to see your lines here. And if you think you could figure it out and do it before you put the honeycomb on, you can, but you'd have to worry about lining it up and everything. So I think it's easier to do it afterwards. And I am just going to simply finish removing all of this from the inside, and we'll talk about how we do our edges around the outside. So I have gone in and I've scraped this all out, and this was not hard. It really was not. And you can adjust to it if you think it needs to. We're going to do so much to it, and nature's not even, as we know, so don't worry about it unless it drives you crazy. On this, I have to take away this optical illusion and look at it because that kind of throws it off for me. Now, those ropes that we made, we're going to look at putting those around here and see what size we need. And I like to think a little bit bigger. This is the middle size. And I will cut it here and bring it across the bottom so that it's not, don't have to turn that corner. I wanted to show you each one of these gourds is a different color. This one being the lightest. Our Be Sweet or Be Happy gourd is the medium color, and then we've got the darker. So again, that's going to kind of be a personal choice, whatever you decide. I'm going to kind of stick with the mustard color, and I'm going to start applying that color. So today to paint my gourd, I'm going to be using the Golden Sunset by Apple Barrel, which is kind of a mustard color. And to do our accent rim around it, we want a darker brown. So I'm going to paint my rope. I'm going to use Maple Syrup by Folk Art, a little bit darker brown, so that it shows off and that you can see that well. But to start out with, let's get started on these little holes. Again, I'm using a scruffy brush, one that you can be rough with and not worrying about hurting. And I am going to come into the individual holes and kind of turn it with a circle. If you wanted to stick with the brown, kind of the medium tan brown, you could. There's some great medium brown. I still like raw sienna. And I had a spice brown that was pretty close to that color. Bambi is another one. But there's all kinds of colors that you can use. Again, that's going to be a personal opinion and up to you. Whatever color you like. Just kind of think about what your beehive color is. And the nice thing about this brown is the white, even if we didn't do anything, we kept the white stuff from showing through. And what I mean by that is you paint it, but yet there are these little areas that you miss, and because it's white, they're so stark that they just really show. And by doing the color underneath, even though we did mess it up, it is not staring you in the face. So that is one good thing to know. So I'm going to go ahead and finish painting this. And when I paint my rope, I want to make sure I turn it on the sides and get it really well, because in between these are kind of hard to get on both sides. And I'm going to go ahead and do the back too, because if it's flipped just a little bit, you can see it. It shows more up when you do the jewelry. So we're going to go ahead and get all that done, and we'll go to our next step. So when you're working in these holes, the right size brush really does matter, because it just fills the hole up when you're twisting, and twisting it's the best way to go. I've tried different methods, and unless you're airbrushing or using some spray paint, that is the easiest way to go, and then you'd still have to go different angles. When you're done, turn at different angles to see this way, that way, to see where you've missed you're painting it. So there's a lot of different areas to check. Now I didn't worry about getting this area messy because black covers up everything, and we're going to do this black. I only suggest black for this area unless you were going to do a dark brown, because it puts things in the background. It sets it, really creates that space, like it's a cutout space or a hollow space in there. So we want to make sure that we do that, and just the black will cover up any paint color that you've used really well, so you don't have to worry about being messy around those edges at all. And I think I'm only going to need one layer of this. I only did one layer of my honeycombs. I've only ever done one layer. I don't think it needs it. It's not a perfect technique. It's not supposed to look perfect. And I don't think you can tell if it's blotchy or not by all the other things we've got going with the bubbles and everything else. So I don't worry about that at all. And then while this dries, then we'll come back and finish our honeycomb up. This won't take too long, but we got to make sure our base coat is dry real well with our gourd before we start putting our final color on. So for our honeycomb, I'm going to be putting a yellow over the top of this. I'm going to try just yellow by apple barrel. I also have bright yellow. We'll kind of see which shows up better with our choice of colors. I'm going to be using, this is about a 1-inch sponge, 1 1/4, excuse me, says it right there. And I have this damp. I've put it in the water. I've squeezed it totally out so there's no water in it, but it's not squishy. And we're going to pull this out. We're not going to pounce up and down because you get too much in one area of your brush. And we want this nice and spread out. And then we're going to just start hitting the part that's sticking out. So you really should start to see your honeycomb pattern appear. And I think that looks like a good color. And look how brown our gold color has turned with this. If you think you need different colors, do it different. And this is the 4th gourd I've done and the 4th different color palette that I have. So if that kind of tells you, and you have personal colors that you like better. So, and if you happen to get it in the inside, if you really want to clean it out with your Q-tip, don't bother though. Nobody will ever know. You'll be the only one that will probably even notice. And this is sure gonna go on a lot faster than painting all those little suckers inside. Let's see, I got some in there because those are kind of sticking out. That's okay. That's probably be a good spot where a flower's gonna visit. So, and if you think it needs a little bit brighter, you can come back and just kind of do it a second time just to brighten that up a little bit more. But go ahead and do your entire gourd. If your bubbles weren't big enough, that you're going to have a harder time with this. This is why it's so important to keep that nice and full around the bubbles. If they're flatter, then that's when you'd have a harder time because they wouldn't be as tall. So I have gone over this and I'm happy with the color. And if you did have some that you got into the centers of that you didn't want as much, take a Q-tip or brush, put your base color back in there. And that'll cover right up over that if you think you don't have any that you want to cover back up. Now this little guy was where the button wasn't. And he should be the highlighted color, not the darker color. But I don't think there's anything wrong with leaving the highlights in the buttons. So that's just up to you, what you really want to do. And now that we've done that, I'm going to take my rope and I'm going to come in with my highlight color and lightly stipple him just to get some highlights on him. Not dark at all. You can see how light that is. So do this after you've about ran out of paint on your brush. And we can add even more on later once we get them on. That's totally a personal thing again. And I'm going to use my E6000 or Gorilla Glue. And we're going to start putting him on. And I'm not going to cut him yet. You can, but sometimes he stretches or unstretches depending on how it's going. Figuring out how far to take my glue here. I'd probably rather not have all of it on and add a little bit. So we're going to start down here, and you want to cover up that edge of your honeycomb where the honeycomb and the door meet. Did I get that down far enough? Yes, I did. And I'm going to cut that right there. Sometimes, especially if it's white, this isn't as stark, you need to touch that edge with a little drop of paint just to knock the white back if you see that white color. We don't want so much yellow in it though that we start to lose it. And I want to see if that's where I want this guy. I'm gonna, right where it kind of meets there, actually I might go to the next one. I've got plenty here, so I'm gonna throw a highlight. You can do white, you can do ivory, you don't have to do it. The dimension that it needs so it doesn't look flat, so it looks like there really is an opening here. I'll show you what a comma stroke would look like. Should have always pull your strokes towards you. That was my first mistake. Everything is so much easier if you do it that way. Okay, all that hard work, and it paid off. Look how nice that looks now that it's painted. It all blends really good together. And I love the comma stroke on that. I think it almost gives it a cartoonish feel right now. I am going to use my whiter flowers that we made with the more yellow centers for my honey gourd. And I'm going to use the ones with the buttercup centers for this gourd. Just to give you different styles as well. I'm going to be gluing everything on with E6000 or Gorilla Glue that is equal to the E6000. So either way, I got a little E6000 here so you can kind of see what they look like. And for this gourd, I'm going to use the single winged bees. For my second gourd, I'll use the double winged bees. So we've got all this fun stuff. It's taken us a while to get there, I know, but it's going to be so worth it. And I'm just going to start putting them on. There is no rhyme or reason except for that we're coloring up some of our lines. So I'm going to start with that first. Just kind of fill this guy up. And we don't want them in a straight line. We want them kind of kitty cornered to each other. Trying to find some bigger ones here. So, and some smaller ones. So I have options. And you can kind of do it down the side, however you think it needs to go. I also have this bottom crease here, so I want to make sure that I cover that up. If you need to hold these on at all, use your painter's tape. I put my flowers on first because I can lift their leaves up and put the leaves under, the petals up to put the leaves underneath. So that is how I really kind of start with it. And I'm just going to come in here. If you want your flowers to lay flat, you can put them on the ends, but I'm not going to put mine on the ends. I'm just going to put them in the middle because I've got my leaves to attach yet. So I kind of just arranged my flowers just to make this easier here. So you don't have to sit and watch me put them on. Now we want to come down and we want to fill in this little area. And we want to think about what looks good too. So like that, and a leaf would actually cover that area up, and then you have it kind of off-centered from this. So don't think about just all the way down there. So we've kind of finished our front part, and you could add more if you want to. That is totally up to you. You can always come back and add more. We've got this little section we've added on here that looks really good. I'm going to wait till we get a little bit further down the line, but I may add a flower or two there. But I want to start, we've got a stitch here, but we've got this guy here. So I want to kind of start with this guy here and work my way down. So I've gone through, and another reason we want to kind of cut our spaces farther apart is so they look good when we kind of cover them up. So we're just going to come back in and add flowers here and there. I have to decide if I think that's a boo-boo or if I'm going to leave that. That was a bubble that was not a bubble, I guess we would say. But we kind of figure out what we still need. We don't want to overdo it because we're going to add our beads, and just kind of take a look at it and see what you think it needs. It doesn't need a whole lot here. Alright, now that we've got our flowers on, we're going to come back and we're just going to put bees where we think we need them. Here, there, and everywhere. So they can go anywhere that you have an open area that you feel you need a bee, and I'll probably do a flower up at that top, but I think there and there and there. So you have all these bees, use them. It's supposed to be a beehive. So all these little fun guys, make it fun. For this guy, we're going to give him a little bit of bling that makes it look maybe like a little bit of honey in the honeycombs. Not too much, but just enough. I found these in the scrapbooking section. I've also found clear ones in the filler section, the floral department. And you can color them with a Sharpie or alcohol inks or anything like that if you wanted to. You don't have to do this. You could use rhinestones. Just see what you have. There's all kinds of things. I found these in different colors, and I think these kind of go with our little theme here. And I just took my tiny E6000, put a dab of glue on them, and stuck them in holes that I thought they needed to go. This was a great thing for ones that I didn't like real well, that I wanted to cover up the holes a little bit if they weren't real clean. So that, you do not have to do that. I just thought that that added a whole little sparkle to it, a little bit more color, and was a lot of fun. I wanted to show you the difference between my very first attempt at the honeycomb versus now. Look how crisp and clean we have gotten this. And this poor little guy, but you don't know it when if you didn't point it out, and you know, it's it's pathetic, but it's still wonderful. People wouldn't ever know, so don't feel bad. That's a background, and we're, you know, working forward, but don't cover up so much of it that you lose your honeycomb. This is about the honeycomb. The flowers and the bees are really to highlight it and show it off. They really make the piece, but don't overdo it that you lose the honeycomb. We're going to start working on our honeycomb, on our Be Blessed or home gourd, whatever, the gourd with wording on it. So I have some other ideas on what we're going to do. And I made this nice and thick, and I like this so much better. And this is so much easier than the way I did my first one. I actually put the bubble wrap on the gourd, and then the edges weren't clean, and I had to sand, and I spent hours and hours and hours just on the edges. So we've got honeycomb in here, and I want you to think about what you can get out of a piece. I have a bunch out of this piece already. We can make the honeycomb shape. The smallest I can do is 2. So we go 2, 2, 2, 2, 2, and 2. And I have a grease pin that I usually do this. I'm doing this so you can see this. If you decide to use a marker, make sure that your paint, whatever paint you're using, covers it up. Up to 5. 5 being big in size. And so this one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I also like to interconnect some. So let's take the 5 and let's hook on a 3 to it. And you can kind of overlap it. You can have it right off of it. This one I'm just going to take off of it. So we're going to do 3, 3, 3, 3, and 3. So we have those like that. And I do a few big ones and then I do some smaller ones. I like to have a variety. Now to cut these out, I'm using my snips. And we do have these at miriamjoy.com. And they're a little bit more heavy dutier than the scissors. And when I was cutting it the other night with the other gourd, I had some issues on pulling some muscles in my fingers just by cutting it with the regular scissors. So these are a little bit easier. But what we're doing is we're cutting behind this line. Now this one we won't be able to use because we've cut into it. Remember that. You won't be using, but you could use that for your next design, the other side. And this is thicker than what we've been using. And you get these nice, crisp, clean edges that look so good. And so I'm just going to go ahead and finish cutting this guy out. And if you get here in your corners and you can't get these real clean, I've even taken my wire cutters and just clipped in there a little bit. And that kind of helped me get those corners. So on my Be Happy gourd, I painted this the same color as this, and I think it blends in a little bit too much. I think this should be a different color, so I'm going to do this a little bit lighter. So I picked 3 colors because you still need it light enough that we can write on it and the writing shows up really, really well. So I'm going to base coat my gourd with raw sienna, and then I'm going to do my honeycomb in the golden sunset, and we're going to highlight with yellow. So before we start painting, we want to make sure that we have our colors all together. So now that we've got our honeycomb cut, I'm going to go ahead and base coat those. I did the edge on the underneath just a little bit. Again, turn it, make sure that you've got it all colored, but it doesn't need to be base coated way under here because we're going to cover that up. So, and when we put that on, so go ahead and base coat your honeycomb like we did our other one. If you used something with the lines in it, make sure that those get covered up. We don't want to see any lines. So I've got some lines I've got to work on. These are scraps, and I loved how the wispy edges turned out, and I'm going to use these in Be cards, Be Happy cards. So I check those videos out. I've also got some bee frames, but there's so many things you can do with your scraps even. I like the wispy edges. Put it on the top of the card and it looks like your honeycomb is hanging down or your honey's coming down. So I went ahead and I base coated my gourd with 2 coats of base coat. You could do one more if you think it needed to, but we're going to put some stippling over it so that it doesn't look so starched. So I'm going to use the gold mustard color again, the golden sunset color, and I don't think I want a bright yellow on it. I think we're going to do a darker brown. I'll probably use chocolate brown again. And I'm going to use a natural brushy brush, but you can use whatever kind sponge. You can use whatever kind you want. If you have just a regular craft one, use that. There's no right or wrong, but I've dampened this. I've squeezed this out as much as I can get it. We're going to load it the same way that we did our other sponge. Pull it out, kind of wiggle that paint around so you're not getting a blotch of paint. You're getting it all nice and evened out. And then we're just going to lightly sponge, and it doesn't have to be everywhere. You can do here and there, or you can do a light kind of layer. It's usually what I kind of do. I like to sponge a lot. The one thing that you want to make sure of is you don't keep doing the same direction. You want to turn your sponge so that you don't end up with a design all looking the same way. And this is real light touch here. We don't want it to be real prominent. We just want to, if you ever have a piece or a area where you started out too hard, you can come back with your base color and sponge over the top of it. I always tell people to start your first one on the bottom of your gourd, so that if it is too bright or too dark, see, like that guy right here, I'm going to sponge him off with my clear bottom part. You can adjust it before you start working on the part that's going to show. So that's always good advice. So we're going to go ahead and apply our milk chocolate. This is a little bit lighter. I always do the light color first and then the darker color. This helps keep my sponge brush or the color in the sponge from being clean or dirty. The yellow would be harder if I had done the brown first, so it's easier to do the darker one afterwards. And then we're going to go ahead and clean that out. I really went back and forth whether to base coat this first. I think it would be so much easier to base coat it and then apply the honeycomb than to apply the honeycomb and try to base coat around it. In the long run, I think that will be a lot easier. And again, I think it would be so much easier to paint it now than it would be on your gourd. And we're going to be using the yellow. And this is Apple Barrel again with our sponge brush. I had a little guy over here, but that's okay. Nice clean plate. I use plates, the plastic plates, a lot because I can reuse them and I don't have to throw them away. And then I just go and wash them and wash all of the paint off. And you can get them so inexpensive at the thrift stores because you don't care what shape they're kind of in. So that is kind of the reasoning behind the little plastic plates. Sometimes I do use the paper ones or the paper plates to show you the color, though, that shows up better. So that's just why you see me do certain things. So we're just going to come in here and sponge our color on. So I kind of found the goobers in my gourd, and I'm going to cover them up. Like this guy has a real flat area, but if we cover him up, he's not as noticeable. But because we've used the silicone, it is flexible, and that's why you stick with that. I'm going to use paint this time, and the reason being is we want to match what we've got. We are using, I want to think about this, the base coat of the color, not the highlighted color. So we are using our gold, and it takes quite a bit of this, so we'll see how this works up here. And you can kind of tell how using paint is another way to do it, to color it, whether you like it or don't like it. changes the consistency of it. This is another thrift store bargain. I go get butter knives. They're great for mixing color and inexpensive. And so much more durable. This is a nice heavy thick knife that I can really get in there. So let's, and like I said, this one's going to dry darker because it's thinned out so much. I'm not going to put it into the frosting bag. Just going to put it on with a knife just like you're frosting cookies. Try to keep it off your sides, but you do want enough to make it stick, getting all those crannies and crevices. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to do the same thing again though. I don't want it too far down on my honeycomb that it would squish out a lot. And I'm going to put him on that flat spot again. And if you need to hold him in place, use your painter's tape to hold him into place while he dries. Again, make sure you have enough to make him stick, be your glue. And I'm going to take my Q-tip here and kind of clean anything like that up. I'm going to put some painter's tape on this guy. And I just kind of started going around and kind of filling it in, but again, it depends on what you're going to say or what you're going to do. On my Be Happy gourd, I just went and looked up Be Happy quotes or Be quotes and found a lot of different ones. Be grateful, be blessed, be loved, be awesome. You can make it personal. There's so many great things that you could say. So I'm going to continue working my way around here. We're going to do Mickey Mouse ears right here. Kind of see how it fits out. And see how we've used a lot of dry time in this project. How I've told you to be patient. I don't know how I would ever teach this class out on the road. It'd have to be a lot of show and tell and prep, and people have no idea the work that goes into being a teacher. The hours and hours, and before you complain about a price, know the education. And before you teach a class, practice, practice, practice. Practice with other people. Practice teaching it. And we're just going to kind of fill it up and evenly move around and keep on working. I wanted to show you, see how much this has already elevated the honeycomb versus our other one. This really shows off the honeycomb. We're still going to come and shade it so it pops the honeycomb out a little bit more, but how it elevates that. So I decided I better stop and make a template of what I'm going to write, where I'm going to write it, so I don't have too much covered up with my honeycomb. And you can put it here and there in between things too, so don't think about it just being in those areas. But I wanted to stop and make sure I left room and adjust for that if I needed to. After I'm done, I'm probably going to have a lot of frosting, but I'm going to cover it up and then probably even put it in a plastic bag, probably with tin foil first. If I had my lid, I could put the lid on it to keep it for a little bit longer in case we need to fill in any other things. So every time I do a gourd, I learn something. And what I would do different next time is I wouldn't put the second layer of frosting on this because we have such a different color here. It stands out enough. I don't think it needs a second layer, and it would be more bendable and more pliable and easier to put on. If it squishes out, and I actually think I liked the squish out parts because I think it kind of looks like honey, and we're going to add honey. You're going to love this part when we get there. I'm going to have to clean the bottom up when we're all done. But if you didn't like the honey or the squished out part, just simply take your hobby knife, trim it, and you are done with it. So don't worry about if it squishes out and you don't like it or whatever, because that's really, really simple to fix. And we're also going to still be shading around the honeycombs to make them stand out and also to anchor them. I did come back with the brighter yellow. It was blending in too much. I came back and used the bright yellow instead of just the yellow to make that pop so that you could differentiate the two colors. I went and looked for a raw sienna comparable to Delta, and I came up with cinnamon in folk art. Walmart, your different craft stores will have that as well. So if you're looking for raw sienna, you have folk art cinnamon. If you think that this color is too different, take your two colors and mix them 50-50. If you think that's too much of a difference. I think by the time we get everything on, that it is not going to be. So I went through and wrote things on here that I wanted to. Home is where your honey is. Be happy, be loved, be blessed. The date and the names. And you kind of figure out if they fit in areas, but I knew I wanted this to be my main focus, so I wanted to make an area for it, because I also wanted to leave an area for the names. Otherwise, we'd have a honeycomb right there in the middle. So that's something to think about. Don't forget, we're still adding flowers, but there's so many other things that you can add into it. They may have a favorite saying or a favorite song or just something that they really like. So at this point in time, I am just going to take my Adena pen, and I just used to write that on with, I just used a charcoal pencil white. Sometimes charcoal pencil does not like to write on your project because it's waxy or build up at the end. You can either sharpen it with the pencil, or you can lightly, because it gets kind of crispy and it'll break real easy, heat it up with a, I heat it up on my stove, an open flame, a match, a cigarette lighter, any of those things. If you ever see me with a cigarette lighter, that's what it's for, that's it. And I just heat it up and it makes it soft to write again, and I just write with that. Now, again, I'm going to reinforce only using the Identa pen. If I'm going to be using the large end, because it will not run when I varnish it. If you decide that you want to varnish it first, varnish it and then do the Identa pen over the top as the last thing. So if you're doing, if you're doing something different than the Identa pen, that way you won't have it run on you. But I decided I'm going to do this first, and I'm just going to do it nice and even. I don't think you need to really sit here and watch me trace lines, which is what I'm basically going to be doing. And make sure you have everything as straight as you want it. And then after I do that, I'm just going to take my white or my wet towel and erase everything so that none of the white is still on there when I go to varnish it. But make sure you're keeping room for the flowers and everything as well. We don't want to have too many words jammed in there that our flowers start to cover up. So think about, like, I would have a flower here and one here. You could almost put there, but you've got your flower going, same. So just think about that as you're kind of working. So I've gone with the pin. I did a pin and put all of them in. And then I came in with bee lines. And I again used my charcoal pencil to put them in first and just kind of made them here and there. You may even want to kind of put them through things. There's no right or wrong. I did use them to kind of divide things and sayings, but also to fill areas. Don't forget, we're going to put our flowers in, and you can come back and even do the pin after it is completely done. So you can always add that. Don't worry about that. One of the reasons I wanted to do the pin first was when we're shading this, I didn't want to lose my lines. So we're going to go ahead and shade this. And I did try the milk chocolate, and it was a little bit too light, so I'm using maple syrup. And again, we're going to do our floating. And if you want to use the float medium, you can do that. I'm going to load my brush about halfway. Depending on how big your honeycomb area is, you might want to make it lighter or darker. And this also kind of helps clean up the areas that may have got a little bit of yellow on them, because we're kind of coloring them dark. So go ahead and do this on every one. And what this does, it pops your honeycomb out, but it also anchors it, so it doesn't look like it's kind of just off floating in the air. So you can see on our other ones, we're going to get to the honey, don't worry about that. I kind of wanted to let that get a chance to dry, but you could even do a darker color if you thought it needed to be darker. But I think that's really good. You can see how it kind of anchors it, but yet it stands out. Especially if you were similar in colors, you'd want to make sure that you have it that way. For our honey, we're going to go back to the clear, because when this dries, it dries clear. See how cool that is? It looks just like honey. Isn't that awesome? So you know when the honey is all the way dry by when it is totally clear. My other one isn't quite there. If you decided you did not like the clear, you can use the white. No big deal. So I'm going to use the clear, and however big your gourd is, or however you may feel that you need to do this. I'm not going to do too much because I've already got a batch going here. And we're going to use the Buttercup Yellow, perfect honey color. I didn't add anything to this. This is just straight color. Just a little bit more here. Remember, the sky works a little bit different than the white does. So while I'm mixing this, I'm actually going to use, I went to the dollar store and I picked VO5 up. And reason it's a little bit thinner, and this is actually going to help break it down so that it goes on easier. It's not going, it's going to thin it out kind of. It just kind of conditions it. If you ever have any of your other stuff that's cracking, or you start to know that gets that kind of hard look to it, you can put the conditioner in it. But this kind of allows for the drip, and because I put this in it, I'm probably going to put a little bit of water into it. I almost put like a little dropper full like that right into it. You don't want it too thin, but you want it thin enough. And then I'm going to put it into our baggie. So I'm going to be using a round tip. I believe this is a number 10. And you can do as little or as much as you want to. The nice thing with this is we're going to put the flowers on as well, and you can go back and put them more on. That is totally up to you. So you can do as little or as much as you want to. So I like to have it dripping, and if it drips off, I've had some that dripped off. That's what honey does. So that's okay. If it drips down, that's what honey does. Now this won't go because it's kind of at an angle, but we're going to kind of push and pull. And I kind of tuck those little tips in, and you can make it as fat or as thin as you want. You may want it more up here and coming down. I didn't like pulling it this way because I didn't get the drop there. And when you're doing ones where it's real vertical, lay it on the side first. And if I can do this without getting into the other ones, lay it back so that they don't drip straight down. And it helps if they're touching. As long as it's touching, it's pretty good. So, that is how you do the honey. And then you let it dry. And when that is dry, go spray varnish it. I would do at least 3 coats of your spray varnish. The bright yellow that we put really brings out the bright yellow flowers, and I'm glad we've done this color, and I really think this is going to be pretty. And the darker brown really brings out the honey. Now I want to show you how I kind of do cover up the top, because we don't have a stem on this one. So we're going to cover it up with leaves, and I'm going to pick some bigger leaves and a flower, and we want to make sure it looks good from all sides. Make sure you're ventilating when we're gluing a lot. Now you can glue these down, or you can leave them popped up. That is a personal opinion, and I am going to do a flower on this side, and we're going to look at it from that side so it looks good too. And my main theme is going to be home is where the honey is, because I think that's the whole theme of this gourd. Dripping with honey. I have a funny story to tell you. I was working on this gourd last night, writing the writing in, and I had everything but the date. I thought, oh, I'll just leave that, and when the time comes, I'll put it in. And my daughter called me on the phone and said, Mom, we have a date. I mean, it couldn't have been more planned if I had tried. I want that to show that direction. Okay, so that looks good both ways. Now, when we're applying these flowers, we don't want to cover up our important stuff. We want to make sure that everything is, you can see everything. We don't cover up our writing. It's going to go in between and on top of the honeycombs. So the nice thing with the bees is they're kind of sticky. So I've been just kind of placing them on and kind of seeing where I would like these to go. And so I can start gluing these on now. And have some hanging over on the honeycomb, putting on the honeycomb, putting on the gourd itself. But like this little guy, he's going to be hanging over. And if you can think about kind of putting them in their little buzz trail, let's call it that, do that. If not, no big deal. And don't put your bees all going one direction. I don't think I said that in the last video. You want them kind of going all different directions. Be careful that you don't stop and just put them in one direction. And if you wanted to put the little smiley faces on the bees, do that. I like the little smiley faces, but I didn't do that on these. So we've gone around and we've put all of our bees on, and I wanted to show you, you don't have to do just flowers. I think this warranted some color. It needed a little bit more color, but it didn't need a flower there, so we've put leaves there. And what is so great about this is look how this leaf is just tucked in, so that we have those kind of options with the tools that we're working with. You can kind of get in there and put things that otherwise you wouldn't normally be able to put in there. And I may put one right there just to divide that space from that space. And I think I'm going to go back and put more honey on it, so it's just dripping a little bit more, because this is supposed to be about the honey. Kind of touch up things if I didn't like how they turned out, and kind of just look at that. But isn't that really cute? I think that's really coming along very well. So I've have my frosting still, and I wrote clear on it so I wouldn't screw it up with my permanent marker. I'm gonna get that out of there just enough, and we're just going to drip a little bit more, just especially in this area, because this is where our message about the honey is. I don't have to do it that much in all the areas, but I thought maybe that would be cute there so we can see where our honey is. I kind of had put my finger in this guy earlier. We won't tell anybody. But I really like the honey. I think it is so much fun. And if you want to bring that over on the top, go ahead and do that. If you don't think it needs it, don't do it. I am gonna take a look, figure out if we really need too much more. I want to clean this guy up a little bit. We're going to talk real quick about using our honeycomb to make jewelry as well. I think the easiest way to do it is to lay it out on a piece that we had already pre-made of the honeycomb. Use your pencil and draw around your gourd piece. I drilled out some little doors and put some leather on the back to kind of make that black there so that that little door shows up. I used the rope to go around the outside of the gourd pieces just like we did the door, exact same. And then I drilled and put a tiny eye hook into my gourd pieces so that I could use them as necklaces. So it works better if you have a little bit thicker gourd than a real thin gourd. You won't be able to catch that. But you could put that hook on the back with some quick wood. And these are the frosting flowers and bees. And I'm really worried about them getting hooked up a little bit, but because they're glued down so well, I think they'll be okay. And the earrings, I did the same thing. I used a wooden piece to secure them on so that they have something secure. Otherwise, I would use the quick wood and the molds. And we have two different types of molds. We have the thin bees, which I worry a little bit about them by themselves, but they're great if they are on a flat piece like that because their wings are really thin near the base. But I love the look of these. I think these are really cool. And then we have the thicker bees, and these are really thick. I don't even fill them up all the way because I kind of think they're filled up too much. But I do have a video on how to color and do the flowers. Look for the quick wood video, how to make jewelry with the honeycomb and how to do the daisies and the bees. And that is on my YouTube channel. That is a free video. And aren't these big daisies awesome? I kind of bent them up, but this is a gourd scrap. I think that is really cool. We also got in some new bees, our bling bees. These are so cool. I'm not sure where I should put this little guy so you can see him without him running away from me here. But I wanted them for jewelry. I think that would be so cool with the daisies. I think that would really add to that. Check out our website for these molds and also for our quick wood to use as the clay I just want to give you one more quick example. This guy is with the quick wood, flowers, and bees. The bees are a little bit fragile with their wings, but this was my first guy, and he's rough, but nobody would ever know if they didn't know or see him in the beginning. So that is how to use the molds with the quick wood.